preparing. And there we go. We're now streaming on Facebook. So apparently technology works for both you and me, Brian. As everything sets up. I mean, actually, there we go.
There it is.
I had to turn off my Facebook because I actually was going on the other end, so I took care of that. Good afternoon. It's our first Facebook Live here with the 1001 New Worshiping Communities as we do a series of webinars and a series of conversations with a bunch of different people. We have Brian Ellison with the Covenant Network with us today. But before we get to Brian, we have a couple different things that we need to tell you about that's coming up with the 1001. First off, next week, we will have next Tuesday at 2 o'clock, we'll have Len Tang from Fuller Seminary with us, and he'll be talking about the church planting program at Fuller Seminary with us at 2 o'clock next Tuesday. That's Eastern Standard Time. It's also not too late to sign up for the Living, Dying, Rising conference that are coming up with us on August 7th through 10th and later this year at St. Pete, Florida. And so we have Brian Ellison. So I'm excited to have Brian Ellison with us. We've connected about 6 months ago or so after the General Assembly, and we had a great conversation. So we're continuing that conversation that we have now. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you very much, Sean. It's good to be with you.
Well, first off, I think a lot of people want to know, well, what does the Covenant Network, what's that all about? And please tell us a little bit about what you do.
Sure. The Covenant Network of Presbyterians was founded back in 1997. It has been working to see that LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer people are fully included in the life and leadership of the Presbyterian Church USA. The form that took back in 1997 when we were formed was primarily focused on changing the denomination's policy around ordination of LGBT people. I think the founders of the Covenant Network thought that would take, a year or two. But as it turned out, that didn't actually change until the year 2011. The organization was committed, though, in all of that process to not only trying to change the policy, but to try to change it in a way that helped the church move forward. And move forward together. We always wanted to achieve both unity and inclusion. And sometimes those two seemed like they were in tension during those years. But the philosophy of this organization was always that you couldn't become fully included in a church that wasn't itself truly one. If the church you were being included in was falling apart, that wasn't success. At the same time, you couldn't have real unity, really authentic unity, if everyone wasn't at the table and fully affirmed and part of it. So we worked for that for many years. I came on board with the organization in 2012. As you recall, much of the conversation at that point turned to the question of marriage. We worked for dialogue and understanding. As we had before, we worked through conferences, through putting together resources, through facilitating conversations, and that policy, of course, changed back in 2014 and 2015. Today, the Covenant Network, we can talk more about this, but we are fully committed to continuing to work to see that just because policies have changed, the reality is that doesn't mean that everyone's lives and hearts and minds have changed across the church. And so we continue to work for conversation and unity and reconciliation, as well as opportunities for LGBTQ people in the church. We've also expanded our mission to recognize the reality that LGBTQ people are not the only ones who have experienced exclusion, who are not the only ones who have had opportunities limited in church and society, and realizing that the Covenant Network has resources and connections and supporters who are committed to addressing exclusion of people of color in church and society, even though we haven't always been fully engaged on those issues, and we still have a lot to learn as we seek to be in partnership with others who are working on those issues. But that's a place where we're devoting a huge amount of our energy and resources in the months and years ahead.
And that's exciting because I just saw something from our stated clerk that just talked about the Hands and Feet initiative that was talking about when we go do a conference somewhere for the PCUSA, we want to be a part of the change that's happening there, whether it's racial or however it might be. So that's exciting what you guys, what the Covenant Network's about. Well, you and I got together. Our first conversation was because through a letter that was passed down through our department, kind of really talking about after GA, what can the Covenant Network do? Kind of how can we better help and serve one another in partnership? And so that's where you and I had a great conversation about 6 months ago about how can 1001 and the Covenant Network kind of partner and help each other in doing a number of different things. But there's a number of different differences as we've kind of talked about amongst us. But you see a much larger picture. What are some of the great hopes that you see out there in the PCUSA?
Actually, I think this is a very hopeful time to be part of the PCUSA, and I mean that sincerely. I think there's a lot of things that define a denomination and its effectiveness and its significance in the broader church and in the world, other than membership numbers. One of the realities that I've seen is that even since 2012, when I started in this role, I really do feel like the Presbyterian Church is becoming defined by something other than our divisions. It's being defined by something other than what we talk about. The program you work with, Sean, 1001 New Worshiping Communities, has been a big part of that, as you have helped us focus on sort of our core identity as a denomination, being connected with evangelism, with proclaiming good news in all its forms to all sorts of different communities in many different ways. And so I'm not just saying that because I'm on your podcast, but the reality is that's a huge source of hope and joy for this church and for me. I do think that move away from division means that there's some newfound clarity about who we are. I think we are freer to speak our mind when we advocate for justice in the broader society, when we work to address conflict, even conflict within some of our churches. We can say, well, here's who we are, here's who we aren't. And I think that allows us to move forward in mission and ministry with a lot more effectiveness. The other thing that I see as a real sign of hope and have the opportunity to see this because of my work with the Covenant Network of Presbyterians is the amazing ministry that is happening, that's being done by lesbian and gay and bisexual and transgender people in the church. There are folks who have been freed to do ministry, people who are ordained today who would not have been ordained 5 years ago, people who were ordained 5 years ago, but who now can be open about the fullness of who they are. And that has changed a lot of congregations, a lot of presbyteries. There are people serving in all kinds of roles that would have just been unthinkable a decade ago. And so when you ask me, where do I see hope in the church? Some of that hope is in the people who today can serve with a new openness and a new power because of the discernment the church has done around this difficult issue.
It's amazing as you look at our new worshiping communities that you see some new worshiping communities that you and I were just talked a little while ago, that I had a conversation with Level Ground in Pasadena, California, and what they're doing through art with their Artists in Residence program, and how that they try to strive around conversations around sexuality, that people try to have those difficult conversations. And you would have never had those new church developments based around that idea, as opposed to a new worshiping community can be started based around some more specific ideas.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, I look at, even in our presbytery, it happens in new worshiping communities, it happens in old worshiping communities. There's a congregation where, which I would sort of put as sort of a middle of the road. It's an older congregation, good long-term ministry happening there, but you wouldn't say this is a congregation on the cutting edge of progressive issue engagement. They've invited me to moderate a panel about transgender issues next month. They're bringing in some folks active in the transgender community here in Kansas City. They've invited all the churches in the presbytery to be part of it. they're presenting it as sort of 101. Let's figure out something let's at least talk about something and learn and grow around something that that a lot of people don't understand or feel confused by. This is the kind of thing that can happen in the church since I think we've become more clear about our identity as a church where all of God's children can come and find a home and indeed exercise their gifts for ministry.
Yeah, I'm excited about what the possibilities for 1001 is in a variety of different, whether you're progressive or evangelical or in between, of what ministry is. And what I like about 1001 is that we have this broad net that no matter what you are, we're there with you. We walk beside you.
Yeah, and I appreciate that about 1001. I've appreciated that about some of the opportunities I've had with the Covenant Network, because some of my closest friendships and most important work has happened sort of across that theological divide. In fact, this got mentioned in the moderator's sermon at General Assembly last year by Heath Rada, where Paul Detterman and Paul Detterman was the head of the Fellowship community, which is an evangelical organization. We traveled around, I think, to 9 different congregations or presbyteries talking about the marriage issue while that debate was happening. And one of the things we disagreed vigorously about the issue, but we were also able to talk about our friendship and our mutual respect and the ways that we can be church together, even with those different views. And I think, the 1001 New Worshiping Communities sort of model that focus on evangelism, on the good news of Jesus Christ, and the way that puts in perspective some of the rest of our disagreements. It's not that those disagreements aren't significant. They are, and they matter, and they're part of the gospel that we are proclaiming. But what defines us is the Savior and Lord who's at the center of this work, and being able to say that and then help the church live into that has been really one of the great privileges that I've had in this work.
One of my great friends is polar opposite theologically than I am within the Presbyterian community. But we agree about 98% of what theologically. It's just that other 2%, but we agree on so much more than we disagree on. And sometimes we forget about that.
Right.
So another one of my questions is, new worshiping communities have been growing into a wide diversity of communities. What are some things that the Covenant Network can do to support the development of some of our new worshiping communities that are out there?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways that we can help, and I think there's others who can help as well. As I described, I think one of the things that I've really valued is the chance to model and facilitate dialogue. So every community and every congregation is going to be in a different situation. They're going to have different needs in terms of dialogue. There's going to be places where some of the issues that one church considers totally controversial feels in a different church like a totally settled issue, and they can't believe we're talking about it. So I acknowledge that. But the reality is that there aren't that many places in the country, certainly not the majority of places in the country, where issues around homosexuality, gender identity are not still live issues that are going to bring about a range of responses and levels of understanding in congregations. And so one of the things that the Covenant Network has continued to try to do is to recognize that and to provide resources that are helpful to congregations, to sessions, to individual people in ministry, to help have those conversations in ways that are based on facts and reality, that tell the stories of people who are really living lives that are affected by the church's discussion of those issues, and that can actually be useful to move the conversation forward. We're doing that, as I mentioned, not only with regard to LGBTQ issues, but at this point trying to also develop resources and make available training around issues of race and racism and privilege. The Covenant Network, I have to say, looks a lot like the PCUSA as a whole, which is to say more than 90% white. And in that, there has been a real lack of understanding at times of privilege and the way that transforms our outlook, and the way that the impact that has on our theology in ways we don't even recognize. So just as, over the past 20 years, the Covenant Network tried to sort of create a theological foundation around issues of sexuality, to give the church the vocabulary that it would one day use to open up the church and move in a new direction. What we're trying to do now is to be good partners with others who are thinking theologically about race and about privilege, and to figure out how we can foster healthy conversation throughout the church from the perspective that we bring. We are trying to do that first and foremost with our national conference, which will be November 8th through 10th in Baltimore. It's called Our Shared Humanity. We're about to open up registration for that later in June. You can read a little bit about it on our website right now, but we're hoping to be getting more information up and announce some of our speakers just in the next few weeks. So stay tuned for that. I don't want to neglect one other thing, Sean, which is that we recognize that our work is not done yet with regard to LGBTQ issues either. It's one thing to win votes at General Assembly or in presbyteries, and that work may be mostly done, to be honest, but it's a different thing to win hearts and minds. And I don't just mean to convince people of something. I mean to help us really figure out how to deal together with things that are difficult. Inclusion doesn't necessarily mean affirmation. Affirmation doesn't necessarily mean that an LGBTQ candidate can get a call. And so we're trying to really help the church live into these decisions that it's made, and that continues to be a growing edge in a way that we're trying to develop not only established existing congregations, but the work of new worshiping communities, and ways that we can be in partnership around the work that you're doing is something that's very important to us.
Well, a follow-up, kind of, how can people connect? Say there's some person in Atlanta that is interested in this racial issues and wants to be involved in some of that. How can people either find the resources or get involved in that?
Well, the best place I can point you, the most comprehensive place, is our website, which is CovNetPres, CovNetPres.org. There's a tab that says resources. You can pull it down and find probably what I would call an overwhelming amount of resources. Everything from all of the speeches at all of our conferences to a lot of pretty well-focused and well-tailored articles that can get to key issues in conversations. We're trying to build that up every month. We're trying to, in the next, I'd say, year, to kind of pare it down and help make things more accessible. But even right now on the page, you can see featured a Spanish language curriculum for helping churches talk about issues of sexuality and gender identity. You can find on the page a whole section on transgender issues that includes everything from videos you could watch or show an adult Sunday school class to more complete sets of curriculum. There's some great material from a place called the Institute for Welcoming Resources. This is their booklet on building an inclusive church. And they not only have printed materials, but they have people who will come and do training in your church. I do preaching and teaching along with some of the members of my board of directors. There's a lot of ways to connect, and I'd say take a look there, see what you can find. If you don't see what you're looking for, get in touch with our office because we connect a lot of people every month to different resources that can be helpful to them.
That's great. And any final thoughts before we close this whole thing up?
No, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to do this. I think we are entering this new phase of our life, this post-church wars about sexuality, with great anticipation of the ways that healthy conversation around these issues has led us this far and will continue to lead us as a church and as an organization from the Covenant Network standpoint into a new day of justice and inclusion and growing together in what we're really here for, which is carrying out the mission of the church. So I'm grateful for the chance to talk about that, and hope this is helpful.
Thank you for all your time, Brian. And if you're looking for the resources, it's CovNetPres.org.
That's right.
website, and then you can get a hold of Brian that way if you have further questions with Brian, and I'm sure he'll be glad to answer any question that you have. And we're thankful for Brian spending some time with us, as well as partners much like the Covenant Network that is trying to help figure out some of these things in today's day and age. How do we do ministry in today's day and age? And for us in 1001 specifically, how do we do 1001? How can we best have the resources to bring those resources to you out in the field? So again, thank you, Brian, for your time, and go back to watching a baseball game. Brian is a big baseball person.
Yeah, but it's a lost season for the Royals almost at this point. But thanks for your encouragement anyway. And
Okay.
thank you, Sean. This has been a great pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.